I won't do the hard open. I usually do the hard open, but it's Christmas Eve. There's nothing pressure packed. Telling people to play Mike Boone, that was pressure packed. Sorry, everybody.
Hey, man, we group apology on that one.
Right? Well, it's
industry apology on that one.
It's my optimism, It's optimism. And optimism, we're joined here Christmas Eve. Welcome back to the couch with Matt Waldman. Always, the most special shows are always with Matt Waldman. And one of the reasons it's great to talk to Matt Waldman, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for a great season. Hope you won your championship. But it's kind of nice to put fantasy football aside for a second. Not that we're not going to talk about football and fantasy football and everything that goes into it. Is that Matt Waldman is, somewhat like myself, but to a much greater degree. You're such an organized thinker, Matt. And I put out there to you, let's talk about what we learned this year, kind of putting a capper. This was the time for top 10 lists of the year. And now we can do decade lists too, best of the decade. And we're looking back, trying to see what we learned, get better in the future. And you had sent me looking forward, the most important players, and maybe somebody who could be a factor that could, increase the whole thing. But what I liked about it, Matt, is the larger meta idea that you had of just looking at interdependence. At the center of this exercise is the interdependence between players and scheme and coaches and all those things. And I feel like this year for me, the biggest takeaway I'm going to have is alignment. Well, really alignment and misalignment. And to the degree of alignment, you have the degree of, even I think Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid last year was a good case of alignment. Hey, Bruce Arians and Jameis Winston, alignment. Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson, alignment. But then you had misalignment, So when you were putting together this list and looking ahead to next year, what were some situations to you that stood out as the ones you're going to be, putting a little Post-it note up to check in come the summer to see where we were at?
I think Atlanta has to be right up at the top of the list because they went, I cover them every week for you, and it's but they went 5-2 at the end of the season, and a lot of it is that at the beginning of the season I recommended to a lot of people Devonta Freeman, he's going to be back, he's going to look good, and then I watch him and I thought, well, he looks okay, but the line is awful, and they didn't really have a great line. And then when you started to see the line come together, they had some easy opponents, but the things that he did were good. So, I look at this and you see Caleb McGarry and you see Chris Lindstrom, who came back in, finally got his first starts, and Chris Lindstrom looks great at right guard. So when you put that together, they still have the offensive skill weapons to be a top team in the league. And so as long as this offensive line works out, I think that you're going to see a strong return for this Atlanta offense, which I think should help the defense, but I think Atlanta really needs to focus on helping out the defense. But that, and then I think Austin Hooper will continue he's gotten Matt Ryan's trust after 4 years.
Right.
I mean, Matt Ryan is the most slow to trust quarterback I've watched in certain situations. That drives me crazy, but it's finally happening with him. And then at running back, who are they, who are they going to have? Is it going to be Freeman? Will they draft another guy? They'll probably draft another guy. If they don't, keep an eye on Kadri Ollison. I mean, Kadri Ollison's interesting to me. I think there's more to his game than people have noted. But that's one team that kind of comes along that is interesting to me. But in the opposite end, you look at Cleveland, and we're talking about them, right. and it's hilarious because Cleveland didn't have an offensive line. But Nick Chubb still did it. They had Joel Bitonio at left guard, and that's it. And Nick Chubb is still leading the league in yards after contact. He's still one of the leading rushers in the league. And he's an example of a player where does the offensive line matter all that much? So that's an interesting one to me. Denver certainly has to be in the mix here because we saw what Cortland Sutton took another step, even though I still look at his hands and I think you're still a bit of a roller coaster in terms of being able to catch the ball. The plays that he made were fantastic. Phillip Lindsay has certainly shown that he's deserving of being the lead back in this offense. And despite not really having a quarterback, Drew Lock is the promising guy now, and you can see certainly where this all could head for him. But it's really about where he goes. Another team that I would probably say is interesting to me is that was kind of had a lost season are the Lions. I liked what Matthew Stafford did to begin the year. I think TJ Hawkinson, if he actually caught some of those difficult throws that Stafford sent his way, especially in the end zone early,
we might have had weeks.
We might have had a very different look at what the Lions were doing. And then Hawkinson got hurt, of course. So I think Hawkinson's the guy to watch, but Kerryon Johnson and Stafford, to me, that's the big deal because, Galladay, you can talk about Galladay and Jones if he's still going to be there or whoever else they bring in at wide receiver if Jones isn't. But to me, it's the triplets to me for that team is the quarterback, the running back, and the tight end. And if those three can stay healthy and be aligned, I think the Lions have the offensive line to be better. And I think that this is a team that may be heading in an okay direction. And then the last one that just really comes to mind to me is the Jaguars. Okay. Because this offensive line was awful. The coaching staff, you could have your complaints about them and that defense. I mean, you lose Telvin Smith, you lose Jalen Ramsey, but you still have a good pass rush. You still have something there at linebacker with Miles Jack, though he hasn't played unbelievable. But DJ Chark really came around. I mean, DJ Chark went from being to me, like a Ted Ginn-like figure to now suddenly being, potentially a Pro Bowl player. And Leonard Fournette went from a guy that I didn't want to touch last year because of the foot and ankle issues and to a guy that's worked his tail off and is arguably one of the 5 better backs in the league in terms of all-around game. And he did it without really, a great scheme, great team around him. And so I really am rooting for Leonard Fournette now and watching how he's played. I honestly hope someone rescues him and he winds up on another team quickly.
Right. So, absolutely. So it has struck me, Matt. There's a lot to talk about. You brought a lot to talk about. We might spend just the whole hour on what you just brought up in the answer to that question, which is good because we'll have a lot to say. Touching on some of the things you said, and feel free to interject.
Sure.
First of all, and a lot of these things, so I had just loose notes of 8 items or headings, and these things are intersecting with all the things I was going to bring up. All right. Okay. Let's go backwards. Start with Leonard Fournette. Absolutely, it struck me that with the whole don't invest in running back mentality that I'm hoping that Leonard Fournette gets another shot somewhere else. Right, like Kenyon Drake. Immediately you think of Kenyon Drake, right?
Yeah.
Just please, because he got it going this year. He took these massive steps forward as a receiver. He stayed healthy. You could just tell in his aura.
And he wants to win. He's calling up his. I mean, the narrative that's been going on off the field is after they lost that Titans game in a hard loss, he's alone on the sideline. Yeah. Just you can tell he's ticked off, and people are saying, "Well, listen, he's called his dad. He's called Marcus Allen. He's sought out mentors to try and be a leader." And you can see that he's kind of in that Frank Gore mold of young Frank Gore trying to pull along a listless 49ers team of guys who want to party. And I think that Fournette really wants to win badly. And you can't blame him. His first year in the league, he took him to the AFC Championship. It was with
Blake Bortles, the quarterback.
Yeah, right. But he might have. Yeah, I mean, it's like if David Montgomery took the Chicago Bears. Right. That's what would have had to have happened. Because of Trubisky.
So there's again, now we're opening up a whole other can of worms. Sure. But I'm going to say this because one of the other interesting topics this year has been tanking. This is all seeping into the mass consciousness now that the Astros did it and the 76ers did it. Really saying we're going to burn it to the ground because that's easier than trying to fix it while it's still. It's like trying to fix a car while you're on the road. Forget it. Shut it down. Put it on side road. Burn it down. We're going to rebuild it. And I always thought. If I'm heading a franchise or in any sort of leadership, I would never want the team to feel like it was okay to accept losing. Just never. You never take the field expecting to lose. You never accept losing. And you're right that for football, that marks almost a maturity of a player, where I think from a religious standpoint, Matt, it's like if you go to the church of like winning is all I experience, then the blessings of the football gods come to you. Like Lamar Jackson, right? Like this idea of like, if you really pure with your heart, like embrace the idea of like team and trust and love and family, and I'm here to win, and all that other stuff happens as a consequence of how wanting to win makes me throw myself into this, then the blessings come. And I think that Leonard Fournette became that guy. Of course, you're talking about a New Orleans guy too. So I'm on team New Orleans now.
And there's a multiplier effect to that, because in baseball and baseball, it's a round ball and it's predictable. Yeah. In basketball, it's a round ball and there's only 5 people who are on the floor at any given time for your team. So there's a multiplier effect when you have more people interacting with all of this. And it's silly, the idea of tanking.
It is. So, Miami, that's been fun to watch. And I think 16 games, like everything means more comes out over the course of a basketball game, over the course of a baseball season. In football, it's like you're at a war and anybody could, you're dead. I mean, when you die, your brothers go down next to you in the field.
You can explain basketball in like 2 minutes. You can explain like baseball in about 10 minutes. It will take you 2 weeks to even touch the surface of football. So I
absolutely. And just as an aside, it's going to be interesting to watch old David Montgomery as he goes forward. I still think I was right about my evaluation. Anyway, DJ Chark. DJ Chark is a fun one to bring up because Matt, DJ Chark stretched my brain in the sense of like what kind of transformation is possible from year 1 to year 2. Eric Stoner and I talked about this too. Like truly the most striking year 1 to year 2 transformation of any player that I can remember. And I don't even have to think about it long to say like definitively no player in the years you and I have been doing this together have not just done a 180, but done a 180 with a jetpack on, Yeah. He was incredible. Okay. Cleveland. Bring up Cleveland. Cleveland really does. I made that joke about Pet Sematary like 15 years ago, I think. But he really does make you wonder if there's some like bad mojo. Like it's like the built on the burial ground. It just don't come back right. But where all this intersects with Matt, and in the last couple of years, I've become really fixated on this, is coaching matters. And more than anything else, if you ascertain one level of a team correctly, quarterback play, offensive line play you bring up, and that's one of the other things I want to say is each picture is different, right? So if we were going to be honest about this, for some teams, like you said about Cleveland, offensive line play is the most important. For other teams, it might be coaching. For other teams, it might be quarterback play. So it's not like there's one right template, but for each team, there is a template that you can kind of grasp. And coaching was such a big deal this year. And you mentioned Detroit, you mentioned Cleveland, you mentioned Jacksonville, you mentioned Atlanta. What are these teams going to do at head coach? That's everything, right? I mean, it changes the entire conversation. So I'm going to go through each of these real quick. Okay. Atlanta's the easiest one. Should Atlanta keep Dan Quinn?
Absolutely, they should, because they played better. Art Blank is a patient owner. He's a good owner. And I think he's not a reactive guy like the rest of these guys who think that they're playing, half-season fantasy football. I mean, he actually gets it, understands how to tweak things and make things work better. And I think that that's what he's done. And this is a team that's been inconsistent, but a lot of injuries were a big deal with this team. So I would definitely say that if they don't keep Quinn, it's silly. Plus, I mean, I can say this as an Atlanta resident. Most people, outside of Atlanta's a big city, but there are very few Atlanta sports fans. So if you're going to judge who's in the stands or who's not, as a reason to fire somebody, then you probably got it wrong. And I think Art Blank, being an Atlanta native, knows that. I think Dan Quinn's going to be fine.
I think that it's totally valid to say, I mean, it wasn't just truly bad luck, but a bunch of things cascaded in a bad way. And I think it's fair to say it's possible that the second half of the year, Atlanta, that beat San Francisco, New Orleans on the road, best 2 teams in the NFC, is the closer to the real team than the first half of the year. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Although I do think they absolutely need to. So here's one of the things you can do with RSP, Matt, because somewhere in this lifetime, I still think like maybe you're not going to work for teams, because I don't think you'd ever want to have a team tell you what you're allowed to do or not do, but they'll pay you for your consulting. And like the number one thing this year for folks in the NFL should be draft a running back, just because this class is going to be incredible. And we see how within a week or two, teams can go from set at running back to signing Marshawn Lynch off the street. Can we just take back a moment? Were you excited? Like, were you excited to hear that, Matt?
Are you kidding? Of course I was.
This is like a Christmas miracle.
Even if
it's a Christmas football miracle.
Even if he bombs, I don't care.
You know, we get to live it again.
The next thing I want is for the Seahawks to sign Steve Smith, and then I'll just quit football right now.
Right.
That'll be great. Yeah.
I mean, Matt, in the 40 years, well, I don't know, 1980, 81. What year was the Kellen Winslow game? Like 80, 81. That's when I can remember football. And I've been paying close attention to football since then. Honestly, over the 40 years, maybe Barry Sanders from like an artistic or aesthetic point of view, but from like a heart, like it makes my heart happy to watch this guy be the joyful warrior. I mean, that's Lynch, man. And he's back. He's back in Seattle. And of course, down here in New Orleans, he can help New Orleans get a bye. So this is beautiful, right?
That would be fun for them. That'd be the only time they've ever root for Marshawn Lynch, probably.
I don't know, man. He's a New Orleans kind of guy, though. They love him here.
He is.
I mean, you can kind of draw a line, Matt, between like Oakland and Detroit and New Orleans, of like a certain kind of mentality and community. That Baltimore, certain communities that would be aligned with like we get each other. Yeah. And I think that's there. But anyway, I just want to take a moment out to say like that's a freaking football miracle to get to watch Marshawn Lynch playing an important football game for the Seattle Seahawks again. And did you see the article about the 2 weeks of crazy training he's been doing? Because apparently a conversation happened a few weeks ago where they're like, hey,
I
saw awesome. It's like a story that like we would make up.
Let's hope it's as Santa Clausy as Adrian Peterson coming back from the knee injury. I hope it'll be every bit as that. That's what I'm hoping for.
Speaking of like father time, like Adrian Peterson continues to be father time. I was amazed that we were talking about him as a fantasy relevant player, and I'm glad he scored in week 16. Is what he's doing isn't pure talent. What he's doing is desire, and that's football gods, right? Like Marshawn Lynch, Adrian Peterson, Frank Gore, these guys that we love, they are like crossing themselves and lighting their prayer candle at that football altar of winning and excellence, like every day.
And defenders are crossing themselves and lighting the candle, hoping they don't get run over or hurt, trying to tackle them, which is just beautiful.
What is beautiful. It's been, and speaking of alignment, someone brought up in the chat room, I think it was Steven, that Tennessee is alignment too. That was another big fantasy football.
Oh, yeah.
Derrick Henry, because Arthur Smith, and hey, Arthur Smith, humility. And I think with almost always, Matt, with alignment comes humility, right? Or with humility comes alignment. And I think Arthur Smith taking over as the offensive coordinator was, and then of course the transformative value of quarterbacks and Ryan Tannehill, which connects me to one of the other biggest stories of the year. And this is why coaching matters, right? The Gase Effect. And if you just got that one thing right, Matt, if you're like Adam Gase is a clown, he destroys the players that he has, and players can have this like helium balloon effect when they don't have to play for him anymore. You would have nailed like 3 or 4 important things this year.
Yeah, that's true. And I think part of it too is, another aspect of it in addition to the coaching part is just understanding that few players are close to perfect. Few players are remotely close to perfect, but some of them, even when they're high-end guys, do some things really damn well. And like, I get so sick and tired of hearing about how limited Derrick Henry is, because when you watch Derrick Henry play, he does a lot of things great. And it's just a matter of, in terms of within that sphere, the box may be smaller than what it might be for Le'Veon Bell. Okay.
Right.
But it's a steel box that is, very sturdy and will do what you want it to do. And I think Tennessee recognized that. Right. And and using Ryan Tannehill. I mean, I think Ryan Tannehill's played absolutely terrific football within his limits. He's played smart football, and this offensive line gets it. So when people were going, we have a decent offensive line, let's throw out the running backs and get a new one. It's just kind of like, well, no, maybe the problem is the guy who's under center, and how he mans things and how he thinks about the game. And so it's just fascinating to me. That's a great story, because even though people may look at Ryan Tannehill as a recycled player, there's a guy that really went through a lot of bad stuff with Philbin and then Gase. and you can see the talent there. I mean, it's not, he may never be a high end, quarterback, elite quarterback in terms of, how you look at it within the league. But this is a guy that, I mean, I had him rated pretty high when he came out that year with Luck and with Wilson and with Griffin. And, I think that he's a terrific athlete. He puts it together much better than Marcus Mariota does. I'll say that.
Right. Okay. So if we were going to do I keep getting award shows. Sometimes I think, Matt, my brain is so rotten from being able to watch as much TV as I wanted to when I was a kid. And I see everything in terms, and also video games. I just see everything in terms of television and movies and video games. It's my way of communicating what I experience. And I continue to see these, it's end of the year fantasy football award show. I've been talking about fantasy MVP, Christian McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, Lamar Jackson, but now it's fantasy football villain of the year. Adam Gase, Mike Boone, of course. And I don't know that Marcus Mariota would be in that picture anymore, but because he got replaced, and actually he made the fantasy football hero of the year in one of the heroes in Ryan Tannehill. But he should have been one of the villains of the year every other year, right? I want to say, again, going back to our conversations about Mariota and his evaluation as a quarterback, the robotic nature, that you mentioned. You really saw how when the play calling and the talent created value, that he could have harvested that value. But when there was something to struggle or overcome with, he was powerless. He was feeble. And then you saw the introduction of Ryan Tannehill. Now, part of the Tannehill story, I think, has to be the career near-death experience, right? I mean, when players have that first real go and they have to build their way back up, especially at the quarterback position, right? Because at the quarterback position, it's binary. Either you're an entrenched starter or you're trying to convince someone you should be. And there's not really an in-between. And he had to convince somebody he should be. Some quarterbacks like Ryan Tannehill maybe don't get another shot for 3 or 4 or 5 more years, depending on how it goes.
Yeah. And that's been Ryan Tannehill's career since A&M.
Well, he wanted to be a quarterback, right?
Yeah, so they voted him at slot receiver. He made second team All-American or All-Conference. And
if I remember correctly, he convinced them to let him go to the quarterback meetings because they put him at wide Sherman, right?
Yeah.
Put him at wide receiver, and they're like, "You're a wide receiver. If you want to go to quarterback meetings and stuff, that's on you. But you still have to go to wide receiver meetings and do all the wide receiver stuff." And he's like, "Okay."
Yeah. Okay. He's that guy that you keep putting in the corner and he keeps coming out swinging. Yeah. And it's and he's flawed and he may not have great pocket presence. He may not always make the best decisions, but he doesn't go into a shell because of it. He's still a free thinker. He's still a guy who wants it and actually works for it. And he plays and he's played wiser. I mean, I think that when you look at this team, all in all, I mean, think about it. He was saddled with Devontae Parker, who's still right. Devontae Parker, as well as he's catching the ball. They're not winning any games. So, they are. But, I mean, Devontae Parker he's not that big of a difference. He was saddled with Devontae Parker and a check down option in Jarvis Landry, who's being stretched out a lot more now in Cleveland than he ever has. And, instead of him being a pot holder, he might actually be a blanket, in terms of how he's being used in terms of the vertical game now. But even then, he's not he's not someone who's going to, win consistently deep. He really had nothing when you think about the weapons around him in Miami. And I thought he made pretty, in hindsight, he did pretty well with it. So I'm not ready to nominate him MVP or an all-pro player, but he should get he deserves a second look here as a starter in Tennessee.
Absolutely. Well, okay. So you will kind of answer one of the questions. And I think the biggest thing when you tell the story of Tannehill in Miami that we have to revise now. So that's the thing about experiencing life in real time, right? Is that things can happen that can change things that happened before. You're like, oh, now I understand what happened before much better than I did when it was happening or when I first reflected on it. And it's Gase. I mean, nothing is going to grow where Gase is the gardener, I mean, until I see evidence otherwise. Sorry, right. Jets fans. It's great that Le'Veon Bell wants to be back with Pittsburgh. It's real, Matt. It's real.
I get it.
I hope they find a way to make the money work and bring him back. Bring him back. There's something there. Anyway, but here's the thing. Again, I want to say the Matt Waldman RSP advice the team should pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for is draft a running back this year. And I'm sure you're going to be able to pen odes to each one of these running backs in a way that says it's a smart thing to add this guy to your team. Like, even if you're Tennessee, it's a smart thing to add this guy to your team. Atlanta needs somebody. I mean, Devontae Freeman is just not going to be the player he was before again.
Not long term.
I mean, his desire, his energy, his want to is there, Matt, but he doesn't have the burst he had like 2 or 3 years ago. He just doesn't. I mean, I mean, maybe another year knocking off the rust, but I just mean, like, there was a point where he had some of that Alvin Kamara, like when he escaped, like got out in the open field, you saw like him moving at a more frenetic pace. But maybe you're right. If the offensive line's better, we could see it. Anyway, I'm not going to get on a soapbox about Devontae Freeman. I am going to get on a soapbox and say, I think for all but maybe a handful of organizations, it's smart to take a running back this year. You're going to improve your offense. But we were talking about coaching and looking ahead to these decisions because we got as far as Dan Quinn, and I think you made a good case for him. But you also hinted at this just real quickly, because this is going to be the most interesting quarterback offseason like ever. When you think about all the names, like all the possibilities, all the teams that are at a fork in the road at quarterback, there's a lot. And there's a lot of interesting names. And like it's kind of like that Culpepper Breeze year. And think about how those franchise destinies changed because of the decision. Culpepper to Miami, right?
Right.
And New Orleans just had to take Breeze, like, oh, okay, I guess we're stuck with Breeze then. So you think now, would you go as far as to say sign Ryan Tannehill to an extension, even like a 3-year extension, or would you say franchise him and see how it goes? If it was your call, how would you handle the Ryan Tannehill decision for Tennessee?
Well, knowing what we know about Ryan Tannehill, I would franchise him, spend the extra money for 1 year. I know it would be expensive.
Just a little bit more. I mean, $25 million is what you got to pay him anyway.
Yeah, I'd franchise him, and I would draft a quarterback. And the reason I would do that is that Ryan Tannehill's used to basically being stuck in a corner. So let's see if he comes out swinging again. I mean, I'd give him every chance to win the job, knowing that it would be I would give it a fair competition, and most likely, as long as he continues winning, that's great, And if it means that we either end up trading our draft pick that we had, or we end up, holding on to him a little bit longer, fine. If you're playing winning football, I'm good with it. I think that this team, I think that you got to understand that Tannehill really hasn't had a full off season with this team.
No.
So I'd like to give him that opportunity, and especially with the young players around him. And this is the thing that people always forget. It's like, oh, let's bring in the draft pick. Okay, great. So who's the leader on this offense? Corey Davis, third-year receiver. A.J. Brown, first-year receiver. Delaney Walker, who's about to retire probably at some point. Jonnu Smith, the offensive lineman. Seriously, this is a young team. Give them a veteran who's been through some wars, someone who's seen the bad side of it and who desperately wants to be good, and who isn't just and is obviously not this BS quiet leader by example, which means you're not really a leader. Okay, that's just I mean, leading by example is a facet of leadership. It's not leadership. It's just a facet. It's a tool in the box. So
yes. I think that you can't abdicate the visibility of leadership. You can't abdicate that. I mean, there's a way to be a quiet leader by example, but you still need to have like that Lamar Jackson or Teddy Bridgewater, like smoldering intensity, like when under the surface.
You have to speak, and when you speak, people have to listen to you, even if it's not often. If Joe Montana said something, he was a quiet, introverted guy.
Sure.
But when he said something, I'm sure everyone shut up and listened. And you don't have to be the Dan Marino type that's going to get in people's faces and scream at them, or you don't have to give, but the point is that people have to respect what you're doing, and then you have to be the one to step up and say something when it needs to be said.
Exactly.
You don't have to be rah-rah, but you have to step up and say it when it needs to come, and you have to recognize those moments.
Right. Well, the respect you get, you earn by being accountable, and you earn by holding yourself to the standards that you hold other people to.
Sure.
And then that's what creates the resonance and the honestly, like the moral, emotional, ethical clarity to say those things that, like, if someone else said it, it might cause division. Because you're the leader, it like releases the pressure that's been building up. It gets the poison out, and you move on. Coaching decisions. All right. So your call again. You're consulting for teams. I'm getting NFL teams, NFL decision makers. This should cost you like $10,000 a pop. I'm giving it to you for free on the couch. The most valuable episode of the year. All right.
You're hilarious.
I don't say that tongue in cheek at all. Matt Patricia.
You stick with him. I think that I think you stick with him, and the reason is that this is a drowning team. This is a drowning. Detroit, Cleveland. These have been the drowning teams of the NFL, and honestly, you need to let this guy fulfill the vision, whether it turns out to be horrible or it turns out to be great. And from what I've seen thus far, the offensive line showed improvement. The defense showed some improvement in terms of, especially up in the front seven, in terms of gap discipline. I think that there were, Matthew Stafford, rebounded before he got hurt. And I think that they have the component for this team to be able to play some winning football. And this is a first-time coach. If you're going to hire a first-time head coach, expect him to he's going to have to feel things out and get into his own and find what is him and what's not Belichick,
Sure.
And if otherwise you're just going to go through a bunch of Belichick lights or McVay lights or Andy Reid lights who, there's not much filling to them. You can drink like 8 of them in a sitting and not get drunk, and
right.
There's nothing really satisfying about that. So I would say stick with one. Let him really kind of get his feet under him, and it takes more than a year to do that. And I think that there's signs there. I think this was another team where injuries was a source of some bad luck for them. And I think that they can get better with what they have in terms of the infrastructure in place.
Well, look, the first month of the year, Matt, they were a good team. They played like a good team. The game they played against Kansas City was one of maybe the best games of the first 4 or 5 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
And Matthew Stafford got hurt, and I'm not sure where else like some of the weak links went wrong. I see the argument there for Patricia, of course. And Matthew Riley brings up something that we just can't get around. It's like, agree on Patricia's close. What they need is a change of ownership. Well,
agree.
Well, that's like, I'm sorry, and that's like some of the other teams we're talking about too. Now, Atlanta's not one of those teams. Another team that needs a change in ownership, but that's not an option, is Cleveland. Freddie Kitchens. What do you do?
I hate to say this, but I say you keep him, and I think it's an unpopular decision. But I think you keep him with some discussion about structuring who he's going to be working with, what capacity they have in terms of how they're working together, and whether they either need to bring someone in that's new or to set up responsibilities so that he's not taking on too much. I think that's kind of the issue with him, is that he took on too much this year. There wasn't enough clarity that he did have as a coordinator who saw it from a different angle last year and seemed to be able to help them out. But I think, again, this is another issue where the bigger problem really is with ownership more than anything. And honestly, it's an ownership fandom thing. I mean, I hate to say this, but this is a drowning city in terms of a sports city when it comes to football. And it's been that and drowning is one of the most painful ways to die, from what I'm hearing. And this team has been dying a slow death trying to stay afloat, out in the middle of the ocean for a long time. And I just see this situation as, how do they got so obsessed with getting Odell Beckham, they gave up an offensive line. They didn't even understand. It was very clear, no matter what they say, it was very clear that they did not understand that the best player on their offense was Nick Chubb until midway through the season. I mean, they really didn't. They show it in terms of alignments, in terms of how they strategized using him. It was like, we're going to force Baker Mayfield down everybody's throat. And Baker Mayfield isn't that kind of player. He's a Jeff Garcia wannabe, which is a 4-time Pro Bowl player who needs a lot of help around him to play like a Pro Bowl player. And, last year was more of a situation where, teams are still getting to know him and understand what he does well and what he doesn't do well. And this year, teams were like, we can pressure him. We can play tight man against him. We can force him to make these pinpoint throws that he can't make. We can force him to stay in the pocket and step up and try and throw, which he won't do. And as a result of that, they get behind early, and this team just didn't understand what it is. And if you ask me, I mean, this team, What this team really needs, honestly, is somebody, God bless them, but somebody needs to cure Alzheimer really quick for a lot of reasons. But if we're going to bring somebody back, they need to bring back Marty Schottenheimer. I mean, they need to bring back somebody like him, because this team has the components of that. Cleveland's identity should be running the football down your throat, having a smart quarterback, be able to play action off of that. Minnesota's philosophy. If you could take Minnesota's philosophy and install that with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, if they kept Kareem Hunt,
right,
and just do and use those two backs, which they were starting to, they use them pretty well together. You got to say, I mean, they do that pretty well. I could see how that might work, but they need to, whatever they do, they need to focus on getting an offensive line. And I just think that Kitchens, if you're going to go Matt Patricia, give him another shot, I'd say the same thing has to go for Kitchens, in the sense that this offensive line didn't stay healthy even with the reserves, so they didn't even get a chance. Even the guys that they had on their offensive line who weren't all that great didn't stay healthy, so you never got a chance to see them gel and maybe get better, and there was potential there. So, again, I would give him another year, but I would probably give him more parameters about how he's going to operate and who he's going to allow, what he's going to delegate, so that it's not him trying to take on too much and be too involved in the offense, when he's trying to manage other things.
So, and look, if I understand you correctly, I like what you did here, Matt, because you are Cleveland at heart, somewhere tattooed inside of you is Cleveland. I know.
Even though I'm wearing a Ravens hat right now, you're right.
Well, I mean, again, this gets off to a discussion that I think might be like a third rail discussion about the natures of different kinds of fandom. Yeah. But there's a kind of fandom that I would say is like the holiest or most sacred fandom, which is fandom that you don't get to choose. It chooses you. You're right. And that's you in Cleveland. And I ask you this question, and I ask you what you would do about Kitchens, but you kind of came up with a prescription in the form of Marty Schottenheimer, but really like an adult in the room. Like I think both John Dorsey and Freddie Kitchens needs an adult in the room, because there's that whole Bob Wiley thing where he said, well, really, Dorsey just needed a head coach that was small enough that like wouldn't threaten his power. And it was really Sam Peasy who did everything good for the offense, not Kitchens. And this is not good. God, again, it was one of those times that the veil was pulled back, and we got to see probably something close to what predicted what was going to happen this year. I mean, in Cleveland.
Yeah. I mean, if I was given like authority, if I was given ownership of that team, I'd strip it to its parts. But
if given the structure they have right now,
bring
in somebody that both John Dorsey and Freddie Kitchens have to answer to, that's going to kind of
steer. If the Dorsey thing's true, then you just have to replace Dorsey, because that's not going to help.
And exactly. Well, and the reality, Matt, is you have this. It's this dichotomy. Like there's the retreads, there's the good old boys network, there's the proven people, and then there's going to someone new. And we did see some going to someone new this year, not with a lot of great results. You don't expect immediate results, right? So go back to what you said: argument for keeping Kitchens, argument for keeping Patricia, argument for letting the program get set, and then building from there is like Buffalo and San Francisco. These are teams that we're continuing to see grow into that plan because of the patience of the ownership. Even though going into this year, San Francisco, the story was maybe not so much patience. But with Cleveland, that would be with the structure they have now. If you keep Freddie Kitchens, you need to do something different.
And you're right. Buffalo is the template for Cleveland. Because McDermott looked like he was in over his head to begin with. But now you watch this team. Now, one thing that they did was, like, instead of going out and going crazy trying to get the best possible receiver they could, John Brown's very good.
Yeah.
We all
they did try to trade for Antonio Brown.
They did. But every team kind of had a little thing in the market there. But
they got lucky.
Yeah. But really, before all that, what they really did is they built an offensive line. And they built a defensive line. And this team, regardless of whether you think Josh Allen is heading in the right direction or not, or he's always going to, or somewhere in between, this offensive line is the reason why this offense is competitive. And this Bills team is a trench team. And you need to be a trench team in the NFL, and a lot of teams just don't seem to understand that.
Well, and to be fair, the Buffalo offensive line was built this offseason. I mean, I think Deion Dawkins. It was Deion Dawkins, and basically like So it can be transformed. One of the things I think, Matt, nobody has really opened their eyes to yet that just occurred to me after these week's games is that Washington has basically rebuilt their wide receiver group and quarterback in one off season, and it cost them what, like a first and a third and a sixth. Yeah. Steven Sims looks legit. I mean, Steven Sims looks like he's viable in like the field stretcher role in the NFL, and he can run some underneath routes and add some things after the catch, like like in the Tyreek Hill, Deshaun Jackson, whatever, in that vein, he can play that role. And a lot of teams don't have a player to play that role. Philly would love to have Steven Sims right now. They're probably going to pay someone that is about as equal as Steven Sims, like $40 or $50 million, right? Yeah. Like, can't you see Philly throwing like $60 million at Robbie Anderson or $40 million at Brashad Perryman just because they know they can't count on Deshaun Jackson? They tried. And Washington has Calvin Harmon, who's going to at least be functional. I mean, Calvin Harmon has proven
promising, I think.
Yeah, and then Terry McLaurin, who's just a revelation,
fantastic,
and Dwayne Haskins was coming on. Yep. And the last few games, just something still real awkward about the way he moves. That is just like sometimes painful, but you see the fight in him as a player. So that's going to be fun to watch. But these immediate transformations, something else to keep in mind as we go through this offseason, we see what teams do. Because I also brought in Bobby Johnson, the assistant in the Indy line rebuild from the year before. So, that's a pretty good idea when you're rebuilding an offensive line. So you can rebuild something in one offseason. It can happen. It can work. And it did for Buffalo. Last coach to talk about real quick. Doug Marrone. It looks like Doug Marrone's going to come back. What?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a Dave Caldwell probably thing, right?
Well, Caldwell and Marrone are like Siamese twins now, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, this team is – I don't think this – I think that they're probably looking at it from the point of view of, yes, our offensive line wasn't healthy. We lost Telvin Smith. So we lost them, and that was some issues. Our starting quarterback, we played with a rookie who didn't play so bad, for some stretches of the year. So there's probably reasons that they're looking at it as having more optimism than the fans do. But again, this is probably a team that just hasn't quite figured it out from up top as well as it needs to. And it's, you can see, what type of identity are they going to have and how are they going to approach this? I mean, again, they stumbled into Gardner Minshew. I mean, you can say what you want about whether their scouts knew or liked the guy or didn't, but scouts don't make the decisions. They don't make the calls. So did Caldwell know this was a guy? I doubt it. It was probably like, we find him intriguing. We like what we see in him, but for him to play the way he did, they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have waited that long to get him and take Nick Foles beforehand in free agency and Foles to play, the way he did. So there's promise here. This team's at a crossroads. And I think that, I'm more pessimistic about this management structure just because we went through Blake Bortles with them. But at the same time, do we say that was our mistake and now we're figuring things out and getting better? And that we're figuring it out? I would say I'd like to think that, but they took Nick Foles. So, the answer is probably I'm still more pessimistic about them. If it were up to me, I would not want Doug Marrone back. I would probably want to change. I would want to make some changes in-house with this particular organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's fitting that every time we talk about this, we can't help but talk about ownership and say, well, the changes we may make underneath won't matter. It's like downstream from where the change needs to be made. But at least they got Tom Coughlin out, which was one of the oddest in the times that we've been doing this together, or even when I can remember, Matt. I mean, that situation changed so quickly once the NFLPA commented. And it shows the NFLPA still has power. They got Tom Coughlin fired, basically. So that was fascinating to watch. But there is certainly such a thing that the game can pass people by. And it seemed like for the Jags, there was a big relief there. I guess when I think about, we already were off the rails, but one of the other football thing I wanted to just tee up for you, Matt, when I think of the big stories from this year, one of the ones I had listed was, New England misses Rob Gronkowski. Like, Rob Gronkowski was that good. Wow. He was really not forget about fantasy football. He was just that good of a football player. We're not going to get our Gronk moment. Maybe we'll get our Gronk moment like we got with Lynch. Maybe. I don't know. But I also was going to say about the whiz kids, right? Because coming into this year, you had like the whiz kids, McVay, Nagy, Kyle Shanahan. So Kyle Shanahan says, maybe a whiz kid, like believing in a whiz kid can work too. Kingsbury, mixed results. I don't know if LaFleur's one of the whiz kids or not. Green Bay, it's so odd. It doesn't feel like Green Bay's been a smashing success this year, but here they are going to be at the number 1 seed. I don't know. Their defense was good at the beginning of the year. I don't feel like their defense is like a difference-making defense. But, I mean, everything starts over when the playoffs start, and we'll see what happens. So the whiz kids, when I say the whiz kids, like what pops into your head?
I don't think what pops in my head is I don't think Kyle Shanahan counts as one because of his daddy. I think he's been around all this for a long time. Yeah. He's seen the good and the bad with it. And he was a long time. He's been on several stops with several coaches and had success with, and failures. I mean, he was a whiz kid in Cleveland, maybe, or in Houston, but, not after that,
Matt, I'm going to do this to you because I love you. Sean McVay's dad was John McVay.
Yes. And
he's a football guy too.
He is, and he's an executive. Is he? Was he ever a coach?
He was a head coach for the Giants, and then he was the GM for the 49ers when they went ape. They were the best team in the NFL.
That's true. They were, weren't they? I kept thinking of, wasn't he with the Buccaneers in the 70s?
You're thinking of John McKay.
John McKay and Jake McKay getting knocked into the stands and NFL films. Yeah, no, that's what the problem was. Yeah, then there's some truth to that. And
I'm just having fun, man.
You're right, though. You're right. But I think that I just think that I would have to say that from an operational perspective, Shanahan's had more success. His dad had a lot more success from as an quick, on the ground, boots on the ground type of guy. So when I think about these guys, I think it is, again, adjustments, figuring out how to make adjustments, not letting your scheme rule everything, that you need players to be able to execute your scheme, and that, your schemes can be compelling, but they also need to be player friendly, and they also need to match. And you need to be able to make adjustments when things don't work out. Kyle Shanahan made those adjustments. His offensive run game may be the most complex of what you see in the NFL, and it's dependent very much on the receivers, tight ends, and fullbacks in terms of how they make blocks. But they made adjustments. Whoever the running back was, they played well. I mean, Jeff Wilson, North Texas, Jeff Wilson is a viable option when they put him in the game. But a lot of it's because his team blocks so darn well. Whereas when you look at McVay, it's like you would argue they have better skill talent or equal skill talent. Yeah. If you really matched them up, or at least when Gurley was healthy, but match them up. The problem is that the offensive line wasn't great, and also everyone was like, well, you're running the same 5 damn plays that you were running before into the Super Bowl, thinking the way that you were. And we've talked about this all year. So he finally adjusted later. And I do like his humility to say, well, how come you've started to have a surge? Well, I stopped being an idiot and started giving Todd Gurley the football.
Yep.
So,
things that come to mind, and then we'll just go off the rails for the last 10 minutes from what you said. And I was just having fun because my brain said, wait a second, Sean McVay is from a football lineage too. But Mike Shanahan
that's because he went to a high school that beat my football team when I was in high school.
No, but listen, to try to redeem your point, Mike Shanahan feels to me like the kind of person that would make you nervous to work for or be around. And Kyle doesn't seem at all like his dad in that way. He doesn't have that like, oh my God, a blood vessel is going to break in my forehead at any moment. What's that?
It's your Dante Pettis.
Yeah. Right. That's true. That's going to be
sorry, folks.
No. Dante Pettis fits into another point I'm going to make, actually. So, you're right. The front office nature, like the suit and tie nature of Sean McVay's dad may have, Kyle Shanahan went through the crucible. You mentioned the thing about Kyle Shanahan in the running game. I want to say this about that real quickly. I would imagine that, true X's and O's football people watch what Kyle Shanahan did on the running game and see that he's creating something. Like he's right there on the bleeding edge, like handcrafting something like craftsmanship, but also artistry, like to appreciate what he's been able to do. Whereas like there's a whiz kid thing you get, and it's kind of like when you have a hit album and you just make an album like the first album. No. You have to tap in like Stevie Wonder in the mid 70s. You got to tap in to that bottomless creativity and inspiration. And that's, I think, what Shanahan is doing that maybe the other whiz kids haven't gotten tested and come through that test yet. McVay may be a little bit humbled. And that's one of the things about football where I'm going to tie in Dante Pettis here. And what makes football compelling but brutal sometimes. It is kind of like an Old Testament justice in terms of humbling, how players and coaches get humbled by this game. Like the moment you're proud, the moment you have your chin up, someone knocks you out, Like the moment you take like I always say about games, you can see like some teams will come into the ring, and I absolutely believe in like a mass consciousness that a team shares on a given day. And it starts with the quarterback and head coach. I think in home games, the fans can be part of it. It's like a team that goes in with their gloves down and you get knocked out. Like you go into a fight with somebody with your gloves down for a second, you're going to get hit. And I think that's one of the things that remains compelling. The wheel turns and players get, Brian Tannehill, you know what I mean? Like players get Devontae Parker. Like it's the story's always being written and it goes in both directions. As we'll go off the rails this way, Matt, because yes, Christmas, although when we talk about Christmas, I think you said eating Chinese, which is absolutely, I look forward to doing that tomorrow. And there's Christmas music. I could talk about Christmas music. WWOZ, by the way, Matt, plays great music that just happens to be Christmas music that I didn't hear in 40 plus years of my life listening to Christmas music everywhere else in the world. I just want to say that.
Well, welcome to Real Music Town.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think that we can step back and take it outside of any religious clothing or tradition, although we can talk about it in those terms too. I was at they have a parade here. They have the Crew Jingle, which is like the classic city downtown parade. And then they have the Crew of Krampus, which goes through like the bohemian neighborhood and celebrates Krampus, And I overheard someone in the crowd saying, Father Christmas, Father Time, same thing. And I'm like, yeah. Oh, yeah. And this winter festival is really about like rebirth, the nature of like the cycle of the earth, really, that we're also of the earth that we experience. I've often said that one of the things we lost when we moved on from agriculture is just the ebb and flow of a year, like you work in the spring, you work in the fall, you just get languid and lay out in the sun in the summer, you huddle up in the winter, maybe like make art, make babies, you know what I mean? Like you had a rhythm that you shared with the earth of your year, your day.
Too.
And what's that?
You got nutrition too.
Yeah, all that. Okay. We lost it. I like that. So yeah, well, you already kind of said something about it. It's like, what do you think about, when you think about this, our winter festival, our celebration of rebirth and Father Time and this ride that we're on?
Well, I mean, I think that, again, this is a time of year where you start reflecting. And I think, if we're going to talk about it from a football perspective, there's a lot of things that you can reflect upon. And generally you start to see those things pop up in the spring and in the summer again, in the form of pieces like, everyone thought this player was bad because he didn't have a good season, but stay patient with him. Mm-hmm. Or everyone thought this player was really good, but here's some glaring issues with that particular player that maybe he may be exposed to. It's like everyone was drunk off of Baker Mayfield last year, this time last year, and they got sobered up a little bit. At the same time, people had completely written off of Devontae Parker, or they looked at Lamar Jackson and said, oh, well, in that one playoff game where they schemed against him and he had like no off season to really play with his team in the way that he would need to develop as a rookie, he had 3 quarters that weren't all that great with a team that kind of tethered him down and didn't let him be who he was. So therefore he's not a good quarterback, so this winter will be that time where we'll get a chance to reflect upon a lot of what we've seen, kind of study it, and not just in the moment and react to it on Twitter or react to it on podcasts, and actually look at these things and say, here's legitimate questions that we can head into the next year. Here are things, and I look at a lot of that still. I mean, I think about things like, I think about Pettis. We could say, you look at a guy like Pettis or even Hakeem Butler, two guys that I really like that were rated, top receivers in the past two classes for me. And I look at those guys and I think, well, Pettis didn't show us anything that says that he would be a bad receiver this time last year. And Mike, and Shanahan himself was like, his ability, we expect him to be one of the best receivers in the league. Mm-hmm. So there's a big gulf between what the expectation was and what happened, but doesn't mean that the talent wasn't there. That means that the talent was there, reaffirmed that the talent was there. And from Shanahan's perspective, because Shanahan wouldn't look at a second-year guy and go, he's not going to look at Richie James and say, we think he should be one of the best receivers in the league. Trent Taylor, we think he should be one of the best receivers in the league. No. Hakeem Butler, here's another one to me. It's like, he got hurt before we got a chance to even see if he would develop during the season. I mean, Andy Isabella worked his way into the lineup to get some touches and honestly didn't show much for me other than what we already knew, which was speed in the open field. And he still may have a place for this team that's going to be very good. But you look at a guy like Hakeem Butler, who wasn't healthy, and you think about what this team needs, and it's like they need a red zone threat who can go up and win the ball. They need a guy who can stretch the field deep and also make tough plays over the middle and get yards after the catch. And that's Hakeem Butler to me. I mean, like, that's what his skills bring to the table. So, and one of the things that we're going to see is a lot of these players, there's going to be a layer of media like hype that's going to kind of come over the top of those guys in the form of this great wide receiver class for 2020 and how great all these guys are going to be. And they're going to wipe all these poor 2019 and 2018 guys just off the table. And I'm going to say not so fast about all that, because we don't really know whether those 2020 guys are going to be good and where they're going to land and what all is going to happen. And there will be at least one or two of these 2019 guys who withstand that wave and emerge as being really good. And I think that's an example of something that, in a form of reflecting upon what we see the same way that we looked at Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield.
Well, always context, always just understanding the context for a player and not just the results, and letting the results be the story, because the results are at the end of a story that you grasp as the why and what's possible. And with redemption, I mean, there are a lot of good redemption. Devontae Parker, again, the redemption story. If you said there's a redemption for these players because of being out from under Gase's thumb, that's possible. With Butler, with some of these players, it just takes time. With Pettis, and someone brought up Kiki Cutie. Saline stuff.
Yeah.
What's up, man?
Well, I think
there's health, and I think Pettis has that too. I think there's a thing that's out of view. It's the great emotional divide. It's what you were talking about when you wrote that tremendous piece, man. It's like, seriously, man, it's like a seminal football piece for people to understand what we're watching. Like, we're only seeing like the shadow projection of this much larger story. And what it really comes down to is, I think that what's out of view for a lot of us is you almost have to have like a soldier, samurai kind of level of internal discipline to do this. I mean, there's some players with such incredible talent that they don't need that. And a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's Pettis and toughness or QT and like practice habits, is like just getting to that black belt level of, I mean, even Antonio Brown, for all that happened with him, like, he gets it. Like, there's a level of personal control and intensity that is like the prerequisite for the NFL, and no player in college ever achieved it. And only in the pros can you even find out whether you can achieve it or not,
Yeah.
And it might have nothing to do with how you play. Whether you achieve that level of like personal control and discipline and like fitting in at the NFL level of intensity, of like sharply focused consciousness, it's the part. I mean, am I capturing this? And I got it like 30. If we go over an hour, Cecil's gonna get mad at me. So give me a quick answer. Did I actually capture it, or am I just talking out of?
No, you're capturing it extremely well, because really it's about how hard and how organized you work. and how maniacal you are about controlling those aspects of it and making the right choices, because there are some people who will do all the work and it looks good on the surface to the media, but they may not be working smart. A good example of that is a guy I used to go play with in music school by the name of Todd Herbert. He's played with guys like Charles Irwin and Freddie Hubbard, Freddie Hubbard and a bunch of other people. And when you see his picture, and he looked like this, tweeted up private school kid from northern Chicago. But I never saw him look that way. He was basically Todd, sorry if you ever hear this, and I know you won't, but he basically stoned out, sandals wearing, never basically sober throughout his entire undergrad that I knew him at Miami. And I don't even know if he went to class other than once a week, but what he did do was lock himself in the practice room and basically study John Coltrane for hours and hours and hours a day. And when you'd hear him play, you go, this guy gets it, because he's figuring out how to play and he's using this as his environment to do so. Whereas there were some other guys who had massive talent who just didn't work like he did. And they sounded good to an extent, but they could only do one or two things really well. And maybe they weren't great in the environments of what they were trying to aspire to be. And I think in football, it's very similar to that, where you have guys who, they get by because they're the deep threat, but they could be so much more. They get by because they had a good season and they think they've figured it out.
Right, exactly. But it's that religious devotion, it's that giving yourself over to something in a way that it's not a question of satisfied or not satisfied. Satisfaction is never even something that comes into the picture, because like you talk about locking yourself up in a room and practicing for hours and hours and hours.
You have to be attuned to the craft.
Yeah, you have to give yourself over to the craft. You have to dissolve into the craft. Basically, like, you become smaller than the thing you're taking on. And I really had an epiphany about New Orleans piano players when we went to the James Booker birthday bash, and all these just incredible New Orleans piano players did the music of James Booker for his birthday in the Maple Leaf, where he used to play in the front window. And they were all, I think, when you first heard them playing James Booker's music, very similar. But then when you actually listen to how they were interpreting it, wildly different. Really letting what's in their soul and their own personal experiences come out. And I realized you can only get to that level with an instrument or anything you put yourself into when you've I could just imagine because the New Orleans piano players, it's an unbelievable archetype in music that Fats Domino, Jelly Roll Morton, and Professor Longhair, and Dr. John, and Art Neville, and you just go on and on and on. And you can tell all these piano players have absorbed, like you said, locked themselves in a room probably and learn the catalog in a way that isn't just playing it note for note, but feeling what it feels like to have that music flow through you so that your own music can come out.
Yeah, go ahead. The difference really is feel. And it comes down to, on the surface, the deeper you get into studying something, whether you are actually performing or you're studying how people perform, really is about feel and feel and timing. And at like you described it, sometimes you may look and go, oh, they all sound alike. They all sound like this guy. And then you realize how wildly different they are. The deeper you get into it, the more you put it under the microscope. And I think that's kind of what goes on here with football. And that's part of that, is that it starts to emerge to a point where why you look at someone like Lamar Jackson and say, no, he's not just like Michael Vick. This is why. And now you start to see it manifest but people want to quickly just put it into a box. They want to put all and it's understandable. They distill it to the lowest common denominator, where one of the things that I love about what we do and what we do with football guys is that we don't always go in that direction. We can, and people need that, but we also can go in a direction where we can talk about it with a lot more nuance than what maybe, a corporate network can do.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, I like to create a space, at least to that level. And you mentioned feel and timing, and I think that only comes with getting the ego or the self out of the way. Where there's ego or self, you can't have feel. It's an interference. It's a wall for feel. And again, what comes where that destroying the ego and the self comes with devotion, surrender, commitment.
And it doesn't mean that you have that figured out away from whatever that discipline is. You can be an absolute, bastage of a person off the field, but still possess that humility on the field to listen.
That's why I say football character, right? That's why we have a term football character. because it, you know, I mean, this is like a way too classic story of like someone that achieved some sort of capital G greatness, but like to the other people around them that looked to them as like a father or mother or brother or sister or friend or whatever, they were like, oh my God, they just left destruction in their wake. You know, they just left they just like humanity. And that's really, we could do like a whole second hour, but it's Christmas Eve. And folks, let me say this, it's a great privilege that I get to sit here and talk to Matt Waldman for an hour about football and stuff, and you guys consider it something you want that allows us, you know, it's great, man. It's great that our mutual love of this got us into those orbits and all these other people in our orbit. And yeah, there's a lot of fantasy football championships, and you know, I won one, I lost one because of Mike Boone, you know, so I really am like, you know, wearing, I shouldn't, you know, you say bearing a cross. It's like this time of year, that's sacrilege, right? Regardless, I'm feeling the pain, the Mike Boone pain. But everyone's actually considering what people are usually like the fantasy football analysts. People have been very kind. You are a very kind audience. And it's great to take this journey with you all into another decade, our third decade now. We'll enter our third decade, even though it's 13, 14, 15 years. The aughts, the 90s. I mean, sorry, the 90s going backwards. What are they going to call the 10s? The 10s? I don't know. And then we're going into the roaring 20s very soon. The next time we're on a show together, Matt, it'll be in the roaring 20s, and we've changed and football's changed. A lot of our audience, I know y'all have changed, but you've been there for us that whole time. So everybody have a great holiday, a great winter festival, whatever this means to you. I hope it makes you happy to be alive and have a chance to experience this in the very unique form we get to as human beings. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all. And realizing that is the, you know, that spirit, the Christmas spirit. Or down here in New Orleans, Matt, of course, Christmas cheer you can buy in a bottle, pour it in your mug, and have some Christmas cheer that way.
I was going to reference bathtub gin when you said the 20s, but then I started thinking about baked goods as well. So anyway,
yeah, well, it's, you know, Alice B. Toklas, right?
Yeah,
is it Alice B. Toklas? Yeah. And the Roaring 20s and everything that comes along with that, I hope, is wonderful times, more laps around the sun where we get to experience football season and so much more together always. So all the best tidings, everyone out there. Thank you for all the positive energy and motivation and encouragement that you give us, and whatever it is we can give back to you. It is always a gift. We will be back at you. Season Live is going to be back to preview things on Friday, and we'll be checking in periodically. We're going to do some playoff previews and stuff, and it'll be the All-Star road trip, and it'll be the combine, and you know, y'all know, you know the drill. You know how it goes down. So thank you, everybody, always for being the very classiest in the entire